So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be covering the TExES Core Subjects EC-6 ELAR, and this is going to be done in 3 parts. So today is just part 1. So before I get started with the actual content and taking a look at the exam, I just wanted to remind you of some of the changes. So in terms of the EC-6 exam, there are 2 versions that are currently in play. So the new version is called the Core Subjects EC-6 391. Okay, and so for those of you that have never taken a Core Subjects exam before, then you'll be taking the 391. That's your exam. For those of you that have, so I know that some of you have gone through a program, like maybe you started with UTEP, some time ago, or you started with another university, and maybe you've passed a section or 2 of the exam. If you've passed any sections of the exam, you were taking the 291. And so when you register, we just want to make sure that you are taking the 291. So in order to know the difference, when you register for your exam and you need to take the 291, meaning that you have already passed some subject area, when you register, it's going to tell you that the exam is going to expire or it's going to discontinue or something like that in December of 2021. Okay, so for everybody else, when you register, it's not going to say any sort of expiration date or parentheses or anything like that. Okay, so when you do register for your exam, once you do get approval, if you are not sure if you're getting the right exam, email one of us and we can go ahead and help you and let you know if it is the correct exam or not, because we can always make it on our end. Okay, so just that reminder. So if you have taken and passed any sections of the 291, you only have until December of 2021 to pass that entire exam. So after December of 2021, the 291 exam is going to be like discontinued, I guess, right? It's going to be put out of use. It's no longer going to be valid. And so if let's say you passed all the subjects except for 1, right? Like, let's say you were still needing that math and you don't pass it by December of 2021, then in January, you're going to have to start all over and start by taking the whole 391. And now you have to pass all 5 subjects again. Okay, so I know there aren't that many of you here in the room with us today that are going to follow under that. I know that the majority of you are taking the 391. Okay. And so in terms of today's review, I'm only covering the competencies that are related to the 391. And so there's that competency 1 is the exact same one for 291 and 391. Okay, but and then competency 2 and 3 are just different numbers in the 291. All right, so just to go over the test, I know that all of you were able to take a practice exam with us and you got your scores, right? I'm still working on getting those breakdowns for you so you know specifically which competencies you need to study. But when we look at the Core Subjects EC-6 test, you'll see that there is a total of 5 hours to take the exam, and each subject exam has its own specific amount of time. And so with the English part, you do have 1 hour and 10 minutes to take that exam, and there are 45 questions, which may seem like, oh, that's enough time, right? But it's really like, 2 to 3 minutes per question, right? If you really like divide the time, it's not a lot of time. So with these tests, with the EC-6 exam, there are quite a few questions and there's not a lot of time, right? Like, let's say you look at the social studies, for example, you have 50 minutes to answer 40 questions. That's like a minute a question, right? It's not a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you're being very wise with your time. You really make sure that you're monitoring, how much time you have available. And, if you see a question and you're taking a really long time on it, skip it, right? Skip it, move on to something else. And then, just flag it so you can come back and answer it later. So when you do take the test at the testing site, it's going to be a little bit different than when you take the qualifying exam with us at the service center. So at the service center, all we have is a paper test, right? So you're going to use a pencil, paper, you can write on the test and all that. But when you go to the service center, not the service center. When you go to the testing site, you'll be given a dry erase board and a marker, and that's it. Okay, so the computer itself it's going to allow you to flag questions. So if there's a question that you need to come back to, you can flag it, but that's it. It doesn't let you like cross out answer choices. It doesn't let you do anything like that. So when you test, what I suggest you do is use your whiteboard to write out the letters, right? A, B, C, D or A, B, C, D, E. And then as you're going through and eliminating answers, cross out the ones that you're eliminating. Like that's kind of one way that you can use a whiteboard. You could also use the whiteboard to maybe jot down, right? If things are popping up in your head, you're remembering things, you know, kind of write them down or make a note of like questions that you want to come back to, you know, and obviously on the computer, it's going to let you flag them, but it's really limited in terms of like what it provides you for testing. So some things to consider, and based on, you know, people that have tested and things that they've told me, things that they're like, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. Try to make sure you use the restroom before you begin, because what happens is when you go into the testing site, and I'm sure this happened with Thea as well, right? They're gonna, you know, practically strip search you, right? They're gonna make sure that you're not bringing anything like, you know, illegal into the testing site. So they're gonna, you know, check all of you. You know, you have to check in your bags, your phones, all that stuff. They'll let you in, and then if you have to use the restroom, you leave. And then you have to wait to get back in again. So if there's a line of people that are trying to get into the testing center, you're going to be stuck in line, right? There's not like a separate entrance for you or anything like that. So just make sure that you try to use restroom before so that you have all of your time, because the clock doesn't stop. The timer will just keep on going. You want to make sure that you do read each question carefully. And I suggest you start with the question. So some of these questions have like a stimulus, like there's a paragraph or there's a lot of stuff that you have to read. I suggest you just go straight to the question, read the question, and then go back, and now you know what to look for. So that way you're not reading the question twice, just because you have limited time. And then the last thing to consider and to remember is to not leave any answers blank. Okay, so keep track of that time. And let's say you have like a minute left, you know, and you're like, oh my gosh, I still have to answer, you know, 5 questions, then just go through and guess, right? We don't want to leave a single question blank, because you never know. I had one intern who left, I think she left like 5 questions blank, and she failed the test by like 1 question, you know? So if she had just guessed on those last questions, she might have passed. So same thing when you come in with us at the service center to take our qualifying exam again later, you want to make sure that you answer all of the questions. So obviously on the computer, I would assume, I'm not positive, I would assume that there's a timer like on the screen, but when you come into the service center with us, we have the timer. There's not like a visible timer that you can see. So make sure you have a watch, you know, so that you can, you know, keep track of that time. Okay, so in terms of the types of questions for this exam, there's going to be single questions. And with those ones, it's either going to be a direct question or an incomplete statement. And then sometimes it may have some sort of a stimulus, such as a passage or a graphic or a table or a combination of any of those. And then there's also going to be clustered questions. So you'll have like some sort of stimulus, and then you'll have 2 or more questions that are all related to that specific stimulus. So, but it'll be testing kind of like different competencies. And so with the clustered questions, again, there's going to be a lot of information. So I suggest you read the question, then go back, look for your answer, right? Go to the next question, read the question, then go back, look for your next answer. And that's just going to be a way to kind of save time. All right. And so again, for that clustered question approach, right? Read the question, then read the stimulus, read carefully and critically, and then try to read the question from the teacher's point of view or mindset. So with all of these questions, right, you have to think of, okay, if I was the teacher, right, what should I be doing? Not what would I be doing, right? Because in some cases we've learned things or we were taught a certain way, you know, like the way I was taught is by no means the way we should be, you know, teaching now. So if I am thinking like, oh, well, this is what I think my teacher would have done, you know, 20 years ago, right? Then that is not how we need to be thinking. We need to be thinking based on what I've learned, based on what I should be doing in the classroom, you know, what should I be doing in that situation? Okay, and so when it comes to studying, what you want to do is access that preparation manual. So at the NESync website, you'll be able to access that. And let me get this link here real quick. Okay. So you'll go to the NESync website. And then I remember I asked you all to bookmark it. So I know that you all should have bookmarked your STR, what's it called? Preparation manual. So I went ahead and I dropped the link in there for this website here. So when you get to this website, you'll click on exams, and then you'll go ahead and click on TExES, and then you'll go ahead and click on your exam, right? So like I said, if you are taking the 291, right? Remember I told you it's going to, in parentheses, it's going to tell you when that exam is going to expire. So you would be going to this one. But for most of you here with me today, you're going to be clicking on the 391. Okay, so once you click on the 391, it's going to take you here. And if I click on preparation materials, this is what I want to bookmark. So this link here. So this is a link that you want to make sure that you bookmark. And this is going to have all of your competencies. Okay, so when we scroll down, we can see our competency and we can see all of these descriptors. Remember, the descriptors are telling you specifically what you need to know or what you need to study. In other words, what you as a teacher should be doing in the classroom. Okay, so when we're studying for these tests, we don't want to be thinking, oh, I just have to pass this test, right? No, I have to know this material because when I am teaching my students, this is what I should be doing in the classroom. This is what the state of Texas expects you to be doing in the classroom. Okay, so once you access the preparation manual, you want to make sure that you use those descriptors to focus your studying. And then on the next slide, there's a link that you'll be able to access, which is, again, that organizer that Mr. Hinojos went over on Monday to help you kind of keep your notes together. So when you click on the link, it should take you to this document. And you should be able to make a copy. So if you click on the download button, it should allow you to make a copy of it, and then you can save it somewhere. But this is the same document that Mr. Hinojos shared on Monday, but you would just be filling it out for ELAR, okay? And again, this is just a way to study, to just kind of keep your stuff together. All right. Okay, so let's get started with content. So we're going to be going over the first 3 competencies today. So we're going to start with competency 1. And competency 1 is just related to oral language. Okay, so the way they have organized the competencies for ELAR is kind of like this natural progression of how students will be working on their like literacy skills or being able to be like proficient readers. So first like core skill that students need to develop and they should be, and they should have is going to be oral language. Okay, so oral language is something that all of you in Head Start are going to work on, right? It's something that you work on all the time. So this is just kind of looking at those strategies and ways that you can provide students the opportunities to work on that oral language. Because if they have good oral language, that's going to help them with, with reading. It's going to help them with comprehension. It's going to help them with all of that, right? So this is kind of like this, this main pillar that students need to be proficient readers. So with oral language, and as a note, what I did, so on your preparation manual, right, remember I mentioned that under the competency, you have these descriptors, right? So this is descriptor A. So what I tried to do with this presentation is I put a little tab here and it shows you what descriptor I'm covering. Okay, so I tried to link that information together just so that it was easier for you when it comes time to studying on your own and to filling out that sheet. Now, for some of these, the information kind of blended like what I have. So it'll say like CDE, like it'll say which ones it's covering. Okay, so with oral language, most children come to school and they're able to speak and listen in at least one language, right? And so even for you all that are teaching 3-year-olds, right, your kids are speaking and they can listen in at least one language. Maybe it's not English, right? But they're able to do that in at least one language. And so when we look at how we, like, I guess, work on our literacy skills, children are going to gain mastery of the language by learning these things. So there's the sounds of language, which are phonemes. And like in Spanish, that's called fonetico. So, you know, I know some of you had done this, had gone to school in Mexico. And so maybe that might help you with understanding what the terms mean. But phonemes are just those basic sounds of language. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a bit. And then the next one is the meaning generated from language, or semantics, right? And then in Spanish, that's semantica. So we're looking at you know, when we say things a certain way, right, that's going to have a meaning to it. And then how to place words together, or syntax. And again, in Spanish, that's syntaxis. Okay, so with syntax, right, there's a certain way that in English we should be structuring our sentences, right? So if students can master all of these, that's going to, you know, help them again with their oral language and their being able to better understand the language, I guess, just in general, right? So language acquisition as a whole is going to occur by students' innate, or kids, right, people's innate abilities that they have just by listening to people around them. So in the home, right, there's going to be adults, or there's going to be kids, there's going to be people, right? You go out to parties, kids are listening, right? They're always listening. And so when they're listening, they're kind of picking up on those language skills, right? They're kind of picking up on those little things. And so they're not really necessarily being taught them, you know, like you're not explicitly teaching the kids like, oh, this is how we form a sentence, right? It's more like they're listening to it and they're kind of picking up on those rules, okay? And then another way that they are going to be able to incorporate that or get that language acquisition is by interacting with others. So when we think, right, about the way some kids are in terms of their homes, in some homes, kids, maybe they're the only child in the family, right? And maybe the adults only talk to each other, and maybe they're not talking too much with the kids. So those kids are going to have issues with that language acquisition. And so that happens also with our English learners, right? Think about it. Our English learners, more than likely at home, they're speaking their home language, right? So let's say it's Spanish, for example, they're speaking that Spanish. And then when they come to the classroom, that's the only time that they're getting that English language, right? So if they're not interacting with other students to work on that English language, then that's gonna prevent them from picking up on the language more quickly. So we have to make sure that we're having our students interact, you know, with each other or with others so that they can work on that language. And so I'm sure the same goes for all of you, right? We kind of talked about this on Monday, how some of you, you know, you learned English first, some of you learned Spanish first, right? I know for me, right, I learned English first, and I could hear, right, I was able to listen and I could understand how Spanish language worked, but I didn't really start picking up or being able to speak the language until I started having to interact with other people in Spanish. So like I said, I had, you know, grown up and heard Spanish most of my life, but I didn't start speaking it till I got my first job, actually. So I worked at Walgreens and I worked at 5 Points. And so most of our customers, all they spoke was Spanish. So at work, I had to speak Spanish, you know, and my Spanish was not good, but man, did it improve, right? Because now I was actually having to interact with people. And some of my customers would tell me like, oh no, this is how you say it, right? Like they would correct me and I'd be like, okay, now I know, right? So with our kids, it's the same thing. They got to be listening to it, and we have to make sure that they're interacting. Okay, and so what I also did in the Nearpod is I put some videos in here. So we're not going to be able to play all of the videos just because, you know, for the sake of time. But when you do have access to the Nearpod later, I suggest you go back in there and you watch the additional videos. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this one. Now, when we look at language as a whole, we can really look at 6 key language components. So the first language component has to do with phonology. Okay, so phonology has to do with phonemes, right? Or like I mentioned, oh my gosh, phonology. Oh my gosh, I lost the word in Spanish. But it's basically just the study of the sound system of language. So again, phonemes are just those basic units of sound. So for example, when it comes to phonemes, let's say I'm talking about the word cat, right? The phonemes in the word cat are k, a, t, right? Those are the phonemes. Those are the individual sounds that make up the word cat. And that's what we're talking about in terms of phonemes. So all languages, whether we're talking about Spanish or English or Chinese or Japanese, they're all going to have a set number of phonemes for that language, okay? And so graphemes are going to be referring to those individual letters that represent the phonemes. Now, when we look at these words, I know sometimes there's a lot of vocabulary when it comes to ELAR, but if I can understand what these morphemes or those units of the word are, it's going to help me to be able to decode what those definitions are, right? And these are strategies that we can teach our students too. So this phonology, right? When we look at phonology, so this PHON part is kind of referring to sound, right? And so when we talk about phonemes, right, again, we are talking about sound. When we're talking about graphemes, this graph part of the word is referring to like something that's like written, right? And so that's talking about like those letters. So graphemes are the letters. And so one of the terms we're going to see a little bit later has to do with graphophonemic, right? So graphophonemic, now we're looking at the letters and the sounds that those letters make. Okay, so if I can understand what those morphemes are or those units of the words, the base words, I guess you could say, that's going to help me to understand a lot of these words in the unit. So again, looking at phonemes, the word 6, for example, has 3 graphemes, right? Which means it has those 3 letters or 3 letters that represent those sounds. There we go. And it's got 4 phonemes. So I know when I was first learning about the ELAR, I was like, how the heck does 6 have 4 phonemes, right? That doesn't make sense to me. So if I say the word 6, right, and I actually pronounce all the sounds that are in that word, right, it's s, I, k, s, right? The letter X is actually going to have 2 phonemes in it. So it's X isn't just one sound, it's actually a k and a s together, okay? So phonemes are the sounds, the graphemes are those letters that represent those sounds, and then we actually have letters, right? So those are kind of different ways that I can break up language. And so again, if I think of this from a perspective of an English learner, right, these are all things that they may have to learn. In some languages, they don't have certain phonemes that we have in the English language, right? Some languages have a different alphabet as us. So it's a lot of things that those kiddos are going to have to pick up on. Okay, and then here I went ahead and I did include, so this video here is going to kind of show you how you can teach the phonemes with the kids. And I'm going to go ahead and play this video just to give us an example of that. So in that video, notice how she was working on the phonemes, but at the same time was also kind of working on oral language, right? So there were some words that the student didn't know. So she was kind of helping with that. And then she did work on all those different areas. So there was alliteration, there was rhyming, and then there were just the phonemes, okay? Syllables. So all of those things are part of oral language. And you'll notice that everything that we talk about when it comes to ELAR, they're all kind of like interconnected to each other, right? And when you teach it, you won't just teach one thing. Like I'm not only going to focus on phonemes, right? I may be working on oral language as well. Maybe I'll be working on decoding, right? There may be different things that I'll be working on as I continue, growing with the student as they learn. Okay, so then in here, I did also include the video that goes over phonemes. So you can see what those phonemes are. And again, in the English language, we have 44 phonemes, but there are only 26 letters. Okay, so the next key language component is going to be morphology. And so morphology is just the study of the structure of words and word formations. So a morpheme is the smallest meaningful unit in a language. And when I think of morphemes, I always think of root words, prefixes, and suffixes. Okay, and so for our students, we also want to, teach those. Obviously, in pre-K, right, or Head Start, you're not going to be teaching them, you know, maybe these like roots and all that, right? But as they get older and as they start learning to read, if they can understand that words are made up of like parts of other words, right? It'll help them when it comes time to decoding and trying to understand whatever it is that they are reading. Okay, and it's just going to help them with that comprehension. So for example here, right, if I have the word preschool, right, preschool actually has two morphemes. So it's got a prefix and then it's got that root word. And so pre means something, right? It means before. And so when we talk about preschool, that's where kids go before they start like your actual school, right? So for you all, you teach in Head Start, and that is a form of preschool, right? Before our kids actually get into the regular public schools. Another example here is the word unreadable. So again, un has a meaning, right? Like without, or, you know, not or against. Reading, right? It literally means to read something, right? And then able means the ability, right? The ability to do so. So when I decode this word, right, if something is unreadable, it means that I can't read it, right? It's something that I'm not able to read if I look at it. So when we are teaching students this and it comes to that oral language, this is just something that we kind of need to make sure that we're reinforcing and just kind of letting them know, right? Obviously, when they're first starting out to read in kindergarten and first grade, you're going to be starting with small words. But as they move from grade level to grade level, they start getting into bigger words, more complex words. And that's kind of where that the rest of these, right, prefixes, suffixes, and all that stuff. Another example would be like when you're talking about different tenses, right? So if I'm saying like, you know, I walk, right? Or I am walking, right? The end of that ending ing it has a meaning as well. Or I walked. So all of those are word parts that you will teach students as they're learning about language. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, so the next one is going to be syntax. And so syntax is again just defined as the arrangement of words and phrases in language. And again, every language is going to have their own syntax. So for example, in the English language, when we are writing sentences are, for the most part, right, going to be in this order. So it's always going to be, or not always, right, but most of the time, it's going to be a subject, the verb, and the object. And that is the correct way to write a sentence. So so you all do have to know that. So on the test, sometimes they'll give you like a student's sample of writing or a student sample of work, and they'll ask you like, what does the student have difficulty with, right? And so you have to know that a sentence should be written subject, verb, object. Okay, that's in that order. Now, in some cases, there's going to be subject verb inversion, right? And inversion, right, to invert means to just flip it, right? You're doing that opposite. So when you have a subject verb inversion, that's going to happen when you're asking a question, right? So instead of saying you are crazy, right, I'm going to ask you a question. Are you crazy, right? So there's all I'm doing there is I'm flipping. So instead of writing the subject first, I'm writing the verb first. Okay, so you do have to know the order, right, in terms of syntax for the English language. So subject, verb, object, and then also understand what subject verb inversion means. Okay, on the next slide, there is a video that you can watch if you still need a little bit help in terms of syntax, and it kind of explains that a little bit more, and it gives some more examples. Oh, actually, let me go back to this real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and play this one because I think it will help with activity. So the next component we're going to talk about has to do with lexicon. And so lexicon is just defined as the vocabulary of language. So for example, if I look at the word present, right, it has different meanings depending on how it's used. Or I could say, so for example, for present, I could say that we have a present, right? So it's your birthday and you're going to get a present. Or I could say all of you are present in class today, right? Or in class, right? Your students, they're present. So they're going to get perfect attendance. Or, right, if I look at that word present, if I read it a different way, present, right? We could talk about me, I'm presenting to you all right now, right? I'm presenting, doing a presentation. So that word itself is going to have a whole bunch of different meanings. And so the same thing goes for different languages, right? If your students are coming over and they see a word, it may mean something different in their language. And sometimes that happens with Spanish and with English, right? There's a word that you say in Spanish and it sounds the same, practically the same in English, but they have completely different meanings, right? And then in some cases, those words actually do mean the same thing, right? So it really just depends on you know, what it is that we're talking about. So again, this is just something that students have to learn, is a lexicon of the language. Okay, so it's just the vocabulary of a language. And again, in English, right, especially in English, there's you know, different ways of saying words and, you know, different meanings and all of that. So it gets a little challenging. All right, so the next one has to do with pragmatics. And so pragmatics is just describing the interpretation of communication based on context. And so again, every language is going to have its own pragmatics. So there are sometimes those hidden rules of communication that only native speakers may understand. So for example, like I said, my first language was English, and my husband, he is like fluent in both English and Spanish, right? Like he's bilingual. His first language was Spanish. So his situation is kind of interesting. So his dad like only spoke Spanish. His mom mostly spoke English. She spoke very little Spanish. They got together, they got married, right? And so her Spanish is still kind of broken, but they were able to communicate, right? Or as they say, they had in common the language of love, right? So, so my husband, he learned both because his mom pretty much only speaks English in the house and his dad only speaks Spanish. And so he likes to tell me jokes, right? He loves to make me laugh, and he tells me jokes in Spanish, and I don't get them, right? Like they're just whoop, like right over my head, because for me, I do a literal translation, right? I do a literal translation in my head of whatever he's telling me in Spanish. And so I don't get the joke, right? Like I just don't understand it. So he has to like really break it down and, you know, explain it to me in English. Well, it's because this word, you know, could mean this or it could mean that. And so, you know, that's why it's funny or whatnot. So, you know, the same thing goes for the English language, right? Like, let's say, for example, if I say, nice job, Sherlock, right? Maybe I'm saying it sarcastically, right? And so instead of saying Sherlock, like as in Sherlock Holmes, right? I'm saying that you're actually really dumb, right? I'm not saying you're smart, right? Or I could say, nice job, Sherlock. And that's saying, oh yeah, you're really smart, you know? Or I could be talking to someone that's named Sherlock, right? Nice job, Sherlock, you know? And I'm just talking to that individual person. So there's all sorts of different ways that we communicate, and those kind of like, you know, those hidden rules. It's not necessarily something that we like specifically teach, but it's kind of like in the context, right? Like in the moment is how you would be teaching that. So on the next slide, I did include a video there that also goes over pragmatics in case that's something that you do need to understand a little bit better, okay? But again, every language will have its own pragmatics. And so when it comes to our English learners, right, there's just more, you know, those are some things that we have to kind of work with them on. Okay, so the last one is going to be semantics. And so semantics is just how meaning is conveyed through the use of different words, right? So I could, for example, if I'm talking about a child, the child could be called something different, right? So I could say that there's a boy, right? Or there's a girl, or there's a son or a daughter or a kid, or, you know, an infant, or, you know, I don't know. There's just a whole bunch of different words that I could use. And so with our students, when they're starting to first develop that language, they're going to have that limited vocabulary. And so as they progress, you know, through the grades, we want to try to build that vocabulary and make it bigger, right? And depending again on their oral language background, if they're hearing a lot of language around them, if they're interacting with a lot of people, maybe if they're interacting with a lot of adults or adults in different contexts, maybe they're going to have a big vocabulary, right? And so they'll have this huge bank when it comes to using semantics. But you're going to have other kids who don't have that rich oral language at home. And so they're going to have a much smaller bank. Okay, and then again, this one just is a video that just kind of talks about an activity, a strategy that you can use for semantics. And so again, with all of these things that we're talking about, what we also want to remember is that when we're looking at the preparation manual, there a lot of times it's going to tell you that the teacher knows strategies, right? Or ways that you can like teach this with the kids. So we saw one that had to do with the phonology. And so this one's going to kind of talk about how you can work on semantics with students. All right. And then again, there is another video there that just kind of talks about semantics. Okay, so next thing has to do with the stages of language acquisition. So again, we kind of talked about this when we were talking about the science of teaching reading, but the way that humans, right, are going to be getting that language acquisition is going to start when they're about 3 to 5 months old, and that'll start with that babbling, right? So they'll just be making baby noises, right? And that it's not that they're just making baby noises, but it's that they are starting to pick up on language, right? And so I'm sure you all have, maybe interacted with a child, with a baby, right? And you can talk to them, right? You can tell them something and the baby may, blah, blah, right? Like talk back to you, right? So they're kind of understanding how language works, right? Like you get a turn and I get a turn, right? So that's going to happen about 3 to 5 months. And again, all of these stages are things that when you do go to your doctor for those like monthly checkups, right? 3, 6, 9 months, the doctor will be asking, right? Oh, is your baby making noises, right? Are they babbling? Because they're just trying to see if they're reaching those milestones. So at about 6 to 10 months, they'll be hitting that 1-word stage. 12 to 18 is 2 words. 24 to 30 is that telegraphic stage where they're going to start coming up with sentences, right? And then 30 plus months, they'll reach that multi-word stage where they're going to start to use grammar. And it's going to be that functional, right? So those are those general stages that you do have to know. Okay, and we did talk about those on Monday as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you in a breakout room. So I just did a lot of talking, right? So I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance to talk with your groups. And what I'd like for you to do with your groups is just summarize the material that we just covered, and then discuss some items that you definitely need to study and jot them down. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to do that. Make sure that you do pick a speaker. And your speaker, I'm going to call on a couple of speakers so that you can go ahead and share your summaries. Okay. And so however you summarize it, I suggest that you write it down first. So that way you have it somewhere. And then you all can discuss it. So I'm going to give you 7 minutes to do that. So again, first write down your summary, then go ahead and discuss, and then kind of condense that as a group. So now we are on descriptor B, right? We did all of that. That was just descriptor A. So with descriptor B, now we're looking at oral language instruction. So if I'm going to be teaching this, right, what is this actually going to look like? So as a teacher, I need to make sure that I'm planning and I'm implementing systematic oral language instruction. So I have to make sure that I am providing my students those opportunities in the classroom to practice their oral language. Right. So for example, when you all have your kids come into class at the start of the day, what's like the first thing that you do at the beginning of the day when you start instruction, after breakfast and all that? Can someone share with me?
The flag, we salute the flag. We start with our schedule.
Okay. All right. So
or whatever it is.
Okay, great. So you start with the pledge to the flag, and do all the kids say it? All the kids have to say it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one way that you're kind of practicing that oral language, right? The kids are having to to talk and say these things, and that's kind of working on having them speak in class. If you're going to be having the kids, if you're going to read to the kids, you're probably going to dialogue with them, right? You're going to talk to the kids are going to talk to you. You may have them turn to a partner. Okay, turn to your partner and, tell them what you think the animal's going to do next, or, whatnot, in whatever story you're talking about. But it's really like planning and implementing those opportunities for your students to do that. Okay, now as the students are doing them, like let's say I'm having a conversation with my kids, I'm listening, right? I'm listening to what they're saying. I'm listening to what maybe their neighbors are saying. And it's a way to assess the kids and see if they're actually understanding, or if maybe they're saying words wrong, or, it's just kind of helping me to assess their oral language skills. And then at times, right, there's also going to be times for formal assessments where I can like literally give them like a test, right, or something, and I can really like dig down and see where it is that they need help. So things that you want to make sure that you take into account are your English learners, right? So we need to make sure that for them, because they're still learning the English language, I need to make sure that I'm providing that rich environment for them so that they can see, be exposed to more of that language, right? To a bigger vocabulary, so we can work on all that for them. You're going to need to take into account students' individual needs. You're going to have some kids that have a lot of oral language, right? Like they've got a big bank of words. They talk with a lot of people. And so I want to make sure that I encourage that, and I try to help them to work on that by maybe having them help with other students, right? Or you're going to have kids who have very little of that oral language, and I'm going to need to build that up. Some kids will have strengths, right? And then I also want to need to make sure that I'm taking into account their interests. So I'm not just going to tell them to talk about something that's boring, right? I want to make sure that I have them talking about things that they're interested in, that they're going to want to talk about, because that's going to encourage them to talk, okay? All right, and again, this is just one way of building oral language. And so again, I know for you all in the Head Start, this is something that you already do, but it's basically just, giving the kids opportunity, even when they're just playing, you're going around and you're listening and you're talking to them, right? And so if my kids tell me something, maybe I'm going to add to what they're saying, right? Maybe I'm not going to correct them if they're saying something wrong, but maybe I'm going to say it the correct way, right? So that they're kind of picking up on how to do that. Okay, so next one we have here is C and D. And so this one has to do with speaking, listening, and reading. And so all three of these are going to be important for language acquisition, but sometimes listening is overlooked in the classroom, right? We give our kids the opportunity to speak, maybe we're going to read to them, or we're going to give them the opportunity to read, but we kind of forget about that listening aspect that students have to do. So these are some activities that you can do in the classroom that'll promote all three of these. Okay, so one example would be dramatic play, such as role playing, right? So maybe like in the later grades, maybe even in kindergarten, right? I can have the students role play, right? So okay, we read a story, so now I want you to act like the three little pigs, and I want you to act like the wolf, and what is that going to look like, and have the conversation or act out the play for us, right? Okay, you know what, we're going to go to our centers, and we're going to be able to work on I don't know what would be something that they would do. Maybe you're gonna pretend to be the owner of the store, and you're gonna pretend to be a customer, like just kind of role playing, so that they can practice what that sounds like. Okay, you're gonna be the mommy, and you're gonna be the baby, right? So what is that gonna look like? And that's just kind of helping them to work on that oral language, but like in different context. Language play, you all already do this, which is rhymes and songs and tongue twisters, right? Trying to work on that. Even just turning and talking in small groups, having kids interview each other. So obviously in Head Start, they're not going to be doing that, but as they get older, right, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, maybe in 2nd and 3rd, they can interview each other. So just asking each other questions and practice those listening skills. So what does it look like to be a good listener? How should I like, what should my body look like? Where should my eyes be? What should I be doing, like as I'm listening? And then presentations. So presentations could be for different purposes and different audiences. And as we get from 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, that's going to look very different, right? Compared to like kindergarten, kindergarten, you ask them to talk and they'll maybe talk, a couple sentences and that's it. But once they get to 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, you may have them do like a more formal type of presentation and for, specific purposes. Okay, so letter E, when it comes to oral and written language, we want to make sure that we're always showing the connection between the two, like whenever possible. So if we're going to have students write something down, and in your case, maybe we're going to have the kids draw something, right? In kindergarten, that's how they do their writing. They'll just have them draw a picture. Then we also want them to share it, right? So, okay, go ahead and, tell me what you drew and explain to me what that is. So also making those connections. And again, that's just going to help them with everything else as we continue going through. So then you could also have them do like a write pair share, of course, as they get older. So, right. So, I want you to go ahead and think about this question, go ahead and write down your response. So they'll go ahead and write down, a couple of sentences and then partner them up with someone and now go ahead and share what you wrote. So just kind of having them practice that. And that's going to help with their writing and their reading as well, right? So they're all like interconnected. Okay, and then once we get to 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, there are also going to be some strategies that we have to teach our students when it comes to like speech. So we need to make sure that they understand how to speak to different audiences for different purposes and for different occasions. So what happens is if I'm telling my students to write a speech, or I'm telling my students to create some sort of presentation, who is the audience going to be by default? Who are the kids going to be writing for? And you can drop it in the chat or unmute yourself. What are y'all saying? If I give my students an assignment and they're going to have to write something or present something
for the kids.
Okay, so by default, they may think that they're going to be presenting it to the kids, okay? Or who else might they think they're going to be presenting it to?
Maybe to their parents or us as teachers.
Us as teachers, right? So it's typically going to default to that. It's the teacher, or right, it's going to be the class, and that's it. But in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we have to get our students to understand that those aren't the only two audiences, right? Maybe you're going to be speaking to a group of adults, maybe you're going to be speaking to kids that are younger than you. Maybe you're going to be giving a speech to the whole school, right? So we have to make sure that we provide our students those opportunities, but we also have to make sure that we're giving them the audience. So before we tell them that they're going to speak, we want to make sure that we tell them, this is who your audience is going to be, right? And so we have to make sure that we're using the proper words, like there's ways to speak depending on your audience and the purpose and the occasion. And then in terms of the purpose, right, there is, I've heard of pies or pie. So that's just kind of a way to remember the purposes for reading or for writing. So persuade, inform, or entertain. So I need to make sure that I'm also telling them like what their purpose is for speaking. So, you're going to be speaking to the principal and you're going to be trying to persuade them to give you, 10 more minutes of lunch, right? Or you're going to be speaking to your parents and you're going to be letting them know about, the science fair that's happening or whatnot, right? But you have to make sure that you're being specific with all of those things for the kids. All right. Okay, and then when it comes to listening, the same thing, we want to make sure that our students have those, they understand how to listen for various purposes. And so all of these, when it comes to everything that I'm mentioning right now, when it comes to the speech or to speaking or to listening, if you look at the TExES, in the TExES, it'll actually tell you what students have to do at each of the different grade levels. So for example, like in kindergarten, right, students should be learning how to listen for like instructions, or as kids get into like 6th grade, kids should be listening for like comprehension, and they should be like asking like clarifying questions, right? And there's like a little bit more to it because there's a different purpose, right, as they get older. So some strategies that you can use to help students with listening skills, right? again, would be that those same things that we mentioned already, right? So that dramatic play, the language play, turn and talk, even like show and tell, right? So with you all in Head Start, I don't know if you do show and tell, but I personally, you know, I was kind of like, what is the purpose of show and tell? Like, I don't get it, right? How is that academic in any way? But what it is it's working on oral language. You know, you tell the kids, okay, I want you to bring something for show and tell. And what are they going to do? They're going to have to talk to the class and they're going to have to tell them, you know, what it is that they have. And that's also going to be a way to kind of enrich your other kids and kind of help them see like a bigger world, you know what I mean? Because they're kind of getting a view of that student's, you know, home life or you know, whatever's going on with them. So again, these are just strategies that you can utilize. Okay, for speaking, when it comes to grades 4 through 6, they have to be taught to evaluate the content and effectiveness of their own spoken message. So in terms of strategies, students can ask clarifying questions, right? So let's make sure that if their classmate is like presenting a speech or something in class, then, you know, as an audience, we want to make sure that if you don't understand, you ask a clarifying question, right? And that's kind of how the speaker will know if they're understanding, and the kids will know if, you know, that person is being clear. You can evaluate points of agreement and disagreement. So, you know, you can have the kids discuss and then kind of evaluate that. Or you could even provide them checklists. So, okay, you all are going to be giving a presentation to the class, and this is a checklist of things that you have to make sure that you're doing. Make sure that you're looking at your audience, right? Make sure that you are standing, you know, that you're standing straight. Make sure that you're using the correct level of voice and that you're talking at the correct speed, right? So there's all these ways that you can help your students to work on that speaking. And again, this is more for 4th through 6th grade, okay? All right. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and try some practice questions. So next up, we're going to go ahead and take a look at competency 2. And this one is dealing with word analysis and identification skills. Other words known as decoding. Okay, so they all mean the same thing. Word analysis, identification skills is decoding. So again, same thing for this one, right? We need to make sure that we understand what that is, how we teach it, right? And then also how we can help our students if they're having difficulty, like how we can intervene. So when it comes to word analysis, this is basically just referring to how children approach written words and decode them to make meaning. And this is something that should be practiced daily in class. And basically, kids should be taught to be skillful in rapid word recognition. So I know that those of you teaching Head Start, right, you're obviously not working with words yet, but you all are playing an important role in terms of the alphabet, right? So the kids should know all of the letters and they should know what the sounds for those letters are. Okay, so that's kind of like your role. But as we get to kindergarten, for example, even though the kids are still not able to read, you are actually going to start teaching them those sight words. So we have to start getting them to memorize words so that once they start learning how to read, right, in 1st grade, they've already got a bank of words that are in their memory. So it's going to help them to read faster, okay? And so research shows that fluent word identification must occur before children can comprehend text. So remember I said this is kind of like in this progression, right? So the first thing that our kids have to have is that we have to make sure that they have a good oral language, right? And that's something that in order for everything else to be good, for them to be good proficient readers and writers, we have to make sure they have a good oral language bank. Now, when it comes to reading, the next thing they have to be able to do is they have to be able to have good word analysis skills. So they should be able to decode. So if students are able to decode, right, if they have letters on a page and they can figure out what those letters put together make in terms of words, then we're on the right track for students being able to read. Does it mean they're going to understand how to read yet? No, right? right at this point, when we're talking about word analysis, it's just basically decoding the letters and turning them into words, right? Words into sentences. Comprehension is the next stage, and it's the next competency that we'll talk about, okay? So word analysis, being able to decode and being able to comprehend are two very different things, but I can't do one without the other. So my kids cannot comprehend what they're reading if they're having a hard time decoding, right? Because they're going to take so long decoding that they're not going to get the meaning. Okay, so that's kind of our first step that we have to kind of work on with kids, is making sure that they can actually decode those words. So when we look at word analysis, students can identify or recognize words by, kind of these main ideas here. So our first one has to do with that sight vocabulary. So there are sight words that kids are going to learn. There is also going to be phonics analysis, and that's going to be, a little bit further down the road, right? They'll do phonics. And then a little bit further down the road, they're also going to look at word parts. So we kind of talked about that in terms of morphemes. And then there's also going to be that structural analysis, which is also related to morphemes. Okay, and so of course, all of these, they'll kind of build on them as they go from grade level to grade level, and it'll just kind of get a little bit more complex. So it's not like, okay, my kid's in first grade, I'm going to teach them how to read, and now they can read anything, right? They'll be able to read some things, but every year they're going to kind of learn how to read and decode more things. And we just kind of give them those skills as they move along. Okay, so sight words, phonics, word parts, and structural analysis. So when we talk about sight words, these are words that students can recognize without hesitation. So when I teach sight words, I do not have students sound them out. I'm not incorporating phonics at all. It's literally just memorizing. When I see THE, that is the word the. And if I tell you how do you spell the word the kids should be able to spell it. Okay, so we want to make sure that they can do both. For sight words, kids should be able to tell us what the word is, and they should be able to know the spelling of the word. And what that's going to do is it's going to help them to read quicker, and it's also going to help them to write, right? It's going to help them to write quicker. So when it comes to sight words, another misconception that comes about is if I had this happen to me, right? When I was looking for a list of sight words, I Googled it, and there's like a billion different lists out there, right? When I was looking for sight word cards for my son, because I was trying to practice that with him, I went online, and there was like a billion different packets, right? Some of these packets had like hundreds and hundreds of words. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. Like, how am I going to have him memorize these hundreds of words, right? So there's research out there that will actually have dolch words is another way that you'll hear that term. So dolch words, DOLCH. Dolch words are based on, if you look at like all, the way that we use the English language, there are words that you're going to encounter very, very regularly. Those are the sight words that we want to start with, and those are the dolch words. Okay, so they're words that are going to be in like the majority of the English language. Now, as kids get older, right, they're going to start to increase that sight vocabulary. So we're going to start them off with those first words that they're going to be encountering very often. And that way, when they start learning how to decode other words, right, if they come across these ones, because they're going to come across them, they just have them memorized, right? And so it's going to help them to read quicker, decode quicker. So just like for all of you, right, we have been reading for so long that there's a lot of words that we see and we don't even have to sound out, right? We just know what it is. Like, it's kind of like it's in our memory. It's kind of stored there because we've encountered it so many times. And so the same thing is going to happen with our kids. As they encounter words more often and more frequently, they're going to start memorizing words, and then they don't have to decode, right? They're not going to have to sound out the word. They're already automatically going to know what that word is. And so when we talk about the term high frequency words, because that's another term that you're going to encounter, right? You'll hear about sight words. You'll hear about high frequency words. So high frequency words are the most commonly used words in the English language. Okay, so they're going to be encountering those. But I want to make sure that when I'm talking about sight words, I'm using my dolch words And those Dolch words are based on like research. Like there's evidence that's showing me these are the words that kids are going to encounter most of the time, right? So obviously the, I, a, right? Those are words, but they're going to see them in sentences. And, you know, if like here on my page, right, you can see some of those words that I've used. Okay.
Miss Hinojos, how do you spell Dolch words? Like Dolch, like that word?
Yes. So it is D-O-L-C-H. So D-O-L-C-H. Dolch. And I'm probably saying that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like, that's how I spell it, so that's how I'm reading it. Okay, so when it comes to phonics, there's going to be some rules that we can kind of teach our kids so that they can better decode words as they get to reading more and more things, right? So phonic generalizations is going to be some of those. So these are basically just strategies that students are introduced to help them with word recognition and decoding skills. And for example, my son who's in kindergarten, right, every day, because when he was doing virtual learning, right, I would hear the videos. Every day his teacher would play this phonic generalizations video. And every time I do this review, I'm always like, I gotta ask her for the video, and I always forget. So she has this video, and basically it's just a woman, and the woman is saying like E-double-E, always says E, but she does like hand movements. Like she hits her knees like E-double-E, always says E, or I don't know what she does, right? But they do that, and they just play these things, and every day he would hear it. Every day he would hear it. So what that does is now anytime he sees a double E, he knows that that is E. I say it is E. So whenever he encounters that in a word, he's going to know automatically that's going to say E. And there's a bunch of phonic generalizations that work for a good majority of the time in the English language, you know, like probably like a good 90% of the time. That's the rule. Of course, there's always exceptions, right? But that's the general rule. And when we're first teaching kids to read, if we can teach them those generalizations, it's going to just help them to decode words quicker because they're automatically going to know, right? Oh, when I see an O and a U together, that sound is always going to be ow, right? So that's going to help them just with you know, figuring out whatever it is that they're reading. So on the next page, I found a video that kind of has a couple of these phonic generalizations. So you can take a look at them in case you don't know what they are. And maybe one of these days I will remember to message his teacher and ask him for that video so I can have it, because I could not find it on YouTube. All right, so this video just kind of talks about phonemes and graphemes, just to kind of clarify that in case you need that. And then this one provides some of those phonic generalizations. It's only got like 10 of them, but there are like several. And then this video kind of shows you how we can work on that, those like decoding skills when it comes to phonics. So I am going to play this one. So notice how in the video, she talked about just the sounds, and then she related that to the actual letters, right? So that was phonics. But if she was only using the sounds and no letters, that would be dealing with like the phonological awareness, right? Phonological phonemic awareness. And so everything we're kind of talking about right now, like even these little videos, these are also going to be things that you'll be seeing on your Science of Teaching reading exam. Okay, so those are very, very similar ideas. All right, so next up we have morphemic, or also referred to as like structural analysis. So when we talk about morphemic analysis, we're talking about the analysis of our word parts, right? So we kind of already talked a little bit about this, but we want to make sure that we teach our students how to look at word parts. So if they're able to do that, then when they start encountering bigger words, more challenging words, right, as they go through the, you know, through their grades, it's going to help them to better decode them because they'll already kind of have this idea. So there's also affixes and suffixes and derivational morphemes. So when we talk about a morpheme, that's just the smallest unit of meaning in a word. And so what's unique about this is that most of these come from foreign languages such as Greek and Latin, but they all represent consistent meanings. So just like when we talk about Spanish and English, when we look at word parts that are the same in Spanish and in English, it's because they have a common language that they came from. And so because of that, they mean the same thing. And that's also going to be a way that we can help our English learners access the content better, right? If I can show them, well, in English, this is what the word looks like, but in Spanish, this is what the word is, you can see how those things are similar, and that's going to help them to better access the English language as well. So for example, when we look at like the prefix of pre, that means before, right? Or if I look at anti, that means against. So there's, word parts are going to help us to just, figure out whatever that meaning is. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on for this one. So it's just looking at word parts. So inflectional morphemes are something that we do have to teach our students as well. And this is something that happens in the final position of a word. So this is going to typically follow derivational morphemes. So such as a short plural, right? If I add an S to the end of a word, that's just meaning plural, right? Such as in 2 dogs or in 5 pins. A long plural would be adding an ES to the end of a word, such as in churches or dishes. Regular past tense, I would be adding an ED to the end of a word, such as in she jumped high. And then there's obviously going to be a lot more of these, but this is just kind of what we're referring to in terms of those types of morphemes. Okay, so students obviously have to learn that. And so some of these, right, kids will pick up on just by hearing it. They're my little 2-year-old right now, right? He knows to add an ED onto words just because he, based on what he's heard, he's understood that that's like in the past tense, and so same thing with my 6-year-old. Okay, another thing we got to teach our students how to use are going to be clues, right? So you all have heard of context clues, I'm sure. And these are going to help our students identify those unknown words and their meanings. So when kids are little, like for you all, when you read books to your Head Start students, your books have a lot of pictures, right? And those pictures are those context clues that are helping the students to figure out what that meaning is. So you show them the pictures, right? You're not just going to read them the book. You're going to make sure you're showing them the pictures so that even though they may not be understanding all of the words, the pictures are trying to help them to get more of that meaning. And so as the kids get older, right, there's going to tend to be less and less pictures, and the students are going to have to depend more on using the clues within the sentences that they're reading to help them figure out the meanings. Now, some other clues that they may encounter will be semantic clues. So this is basically helping students to really think about what the meaning might be based on just what makes sense in the sentence, right? So if they're reading a sentence and a word just isn't sounding right, or they're like, I don't know what this word is, but based on where it is in the sentence, I know it's a noun or I know it's a verb, right? That's going to kind of help them to figure out what to look for. Some ways that teachers can help with this is like previewing a book, right? So before you read a story, you're going to kind of look at the cover and, okay, so, what are we talking about? What do you think is going to be in this book? What do you think are some things that we might encounter or that we're going to see? And that way they kind of already have this idea of, okay, well, I know, for example, like in The Hungry Caterpillar, right? I know that I'm probably going to be encountering a lot of different foods that my caterpillar is going to eat. So when I come across words that I don't understand, right, or that I can't read, I should have an idea that it's something that a caterpillar can eat, right? It's some sort of food. And then syntactic clues are going to be using the order of the words in a sentence to determine meaning. So remember we talked about syntax, right? In syntax, we said that in English, it's going to be the subject, verb, and object. That's like the order of the sentences. So for example, in this case here, if the students don't know what one of the words means, they already know that a subject should be first, the verb should be second. So this last word is more than likely going to be some sort of noun, right? I'm missing an adjective or a noun because it has to be some sort of like object, right? Based on syntax rules. So these are all clues that we have to teach our kids, and we need to make sure that we're like explicitly teaching it to them so that they understand how to do that themselves. Okay, now when it comes to strategies in grades 4 through 6, our students have to know how to apply these strategies for word analysis. So some ways that you can do that would be categorizing. So that would help the students to understand like the type of word. You know, so if they're encountering like new words, right? You could also have them categorize words based on commonalities in terms of the sounds. Or you could help them use common synonyms or antonyms to define or understand words. So they're just, you know, some of those strategies that they could use. So remember, if students are having difficulty like understanding a word or like, you know, reading a word, shall I say, we're looking for strategies to help them do that. Do they need the dictionary? Yes, they're going to have to learn how to use it, but that's not what I'm going to use every day, right? I'm trying to give them strategies that they can do on their own. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Some things that may provide them, some things that may provide them with comprehension challenges will be things such as homophones, homographs, or compound words. So again, if I look at like this morpheme analysis, if I'm looking at this word here, right, what did we say PHON is going to refer to? What does that word part mean?
Sounds.
Sounds, correct. Yes, thank you, Andrea. So whenever I see that PHON, that's referring to sound. Does anybody know what the prefix homo means?
Same.
Same, correct. So a homophone, same sound. So these are words that sound the same, but are spelled differently. Okay, so notice this is helping us, right, with vocabulary as well. So anytime I see that prefix of homo, it's always going to mean the same. And the way I would teach my students that when I was a science teacher, right, because I had, we would come across, what is it, homozygous and homologous, and we had science terms that had that prefix in there, is I would always bring up the word homosexual, right? And my students, oh my gosh, homosexual, right? I'm like, well, what does that mean? So homosexual means that somebody dates the same sex, right? Same sex. And then when we talk about heterosexual, hetero means different. So if you're heterosexual, that just means you date a different sex. Okay, so homo always means the same, hetero always means different. So homophones, we said phone means sound. So those are words that sound the same. So for example, in this case, my examples are blue and blue, right? They're spelled differently and they have different meanings. Okay, so but they sound the same. So blue and blue. So this is literally the color blue, right? And this is blue, like I blew out my candles on my birthday cake. Another example is here and here. Sound the same, right? But they have different spellings and different meanings. So here, right, I'm hearing you, right? I listen to me so you can hear me, or I'm right here. I'm here in my desk. And then homographs, what did we say that graph means? Anyone remember?
Letters? No.
Okay, letters. So graph would mean like the letters or like the text or like the print, right? Something like that. So very good. Thank you, Cynthia. So here we've got homograph. So same letters, right? In this case, it's spelled the same way, but it has more than one pronunciation and different meanings. So here I've got BOW, and this could mean a bow, like a bow and arrow, or like a bow on top of a gift. Or I could say it as bow, like I finished my, my singing, and so now I am taking a bow, right? So it's the same spelling, but it's you say it a different way and it has a different meaning. And so see how those can be challenging for students, right? Especially if students have never encountered the word in that different context, or if they've never read it that way. These can also be super challenging for our English learners, right? Because they may only know one definition of that word. And so they may not know that there's another way to spell it, or that there's another definition for a word. And then our last one here would be compound words. So once we start getting to bigger words, right, that's going to be challenging for students because they're going to read the words kind of like as individuals, and they're going to think of those like individual definitions. So like, for example, when I take the word basketball, right, if a student is reading basketball for the first time, they may literally think of like a basket, like an Easter egg basket, right? And they may be thinking of a ball, but they're not putting the two together to see that it's a basketball, like that we played, you know, basketball with. So these are all just things that are going to give our students problems when it comes time to decoding, right? Which means that they're reading something and they're just trying to make sense of the words that they're reading. Okay, and so just like right now for this example, right, the way I kind of explained it, this is how we would want you to be teaching vocabulary too, right? So I gave you the word homophones. I helped you with looking at like decoding the word, right? So we kind of broke down the word in terms of morphemic analysis. And then when I was explaining what the definition of the word meant, I gave you examples, and then I also gave them to you in context, right? So I didn't just say the word blue and the word blue, right? I told you that this means the color blue, right? And then I said blue, like you blew out the candles, right? Like I gave it to you in context so that it makes sense to you. Instead of just saying, okay, blue, go ahead and write down that it's a color. And blue, that just means to past tense of blow, right? That's not going to mean anything. But by using it in the correct context, that's going to help with meaning. And so that's why we want to do that with our kids as well. Okay, now when it comes to decoding those very complex words, we just want to make sure that we're teaching our students how to read high frequency words and use those decoding strategies again. So, you know, just like everything we've kind of mentioned already, right, in grades 4 through 6, they're going to be starting to read for a different purpose. And so it's going to be more challenging for them when it comes to decoding. And so, you know, kind of looking at research, and no, I don't have the actual research on me, but like looking at research, you can see that students they may start to increase in terms of their decoding strategies or reading comprehension skills. But once kids hit 4th grade, a lot of kids will have a dip. Okay. And the reason is because, again, once they get into 4th grade, they're not just reading for like entertainment. Now they're reading for, you know, like they're reading to learn something. And so they're going to come across more challenging words that they're not likely going to encounter very often. And that's going to be hard for them if their decoding skills are not where they should be. Okay. All right. And then so there's this video, and she basically just has like a little way of kind of helping kids look at decoding words, just like a little strategy. And then this video, this one is kind of, it's 12 minutes long, but this is also, she's a reading intervention coach. And this one's coming from the website Reading Rockets. That's another website if you need like more help with some of this literacy stuff for ELAR. I suggest you take a look at this website. It's got a lot of like really helpful information, especially for like struggling readers, like reading interventions. And then it's also got a whole bunch of like topics. So like, you know, if you have questions about comprehension or fluency or oral language, it has several like videos, and it's got articles that you can read through. So this is a really good resource. And this is also one of the resources when you go to your preparation manual. If you go to the very last section of your preparation manual, it has resources to help you prepare. And on here, it'll actually give you links to where you can get information. And I know for the ELAR 4 through 8, it always links to Reading Rockets. It's on there. Where is it? Oh, I don't see it on this one. But that is a resource that TEA does utilize as well. Okay. All right, so those are there for you to take a look at later. So next up, we have strategies for speaking. And so again, we mentioned, right, that students are going to have to be, wait, speaking, why am I have speaking? Analysis. Oh, I guess I must have put a wrong title here, but this is for helping students to decode. So students have to be taught how to use dictionaries. They also have to be taught how to use glossaries, right? And other sources to determine meanings, usage, pronunciation, spelling, and derivations of unfamiliar words. So they do have to know how to use them, because when they do take STAR tests, they're going to have to be able to do that. And in their future, right, when they get into middle school and high school, they are going to have to use dictionaries periodically, as well as those glossaries. And they're able to use them on all their STAR tests after 4th grade. And then when it comes to your competencies and your descriptors, it does mention that that when it comes to these decoding skills, that the teachers should try to find ways to engage parents with the students when it comes to word analysis and identification. Now, that does not mean that if a student is having trouble in class with decoding skills, you're not going to send home like extra work for like the parents to do. No, like you're always going to be the one that's going to be dealing with the teaching, right? But there's always ways that we can bring parents in to kind of see what we're doing. So for example, some campuses will do like literacy nights, right? And so they'll have the parents come in and they'll kind of show them games or activities that they do with the kids. So kind of like so that the parents can kind of play those at home with the kids. It's not sending like additional work home. It's just kind of like, oh, well, hey, you know, maybe this is something you could incorporate in just like your conversations or over dinner or stuff like that. So when you do encounter questions on the test, and if it ever says that a student is struggling, the answer is always wrong if it says you're going to send home additional work to the parents, right? Anything like that, that's always going to be a wrong answer. Okay, so again, lots of me talking, and now I'm going to go ahead and give you a chance to talk. So same thing, based on everything we've talked about for this competency, I'd like for you to go ahead and summarize that material with your group. Discuss some items that you definitely need to study, jot them down. And then if you have any questions, have those ready so that we can have you all share them out, and hopefully I can clarify anything for you.
I have a question about these notes or the near point. Once you
Our last competency for today is going to be fluency. So we talked about oral language, we talked about word analysis, and now we're talking about fluency. Okay, so remember, these are all separate things, right? That oral language is kind of something that you'll see like in everything. But for reading fluency, what I want to remember is that this is basically just decoding words quickly and accurately, but being able to read them with appropriate word stress and pitch and intonation. It's more than just reading the words really fast, right? I need to make sure that I'm reading the way we speak. And it's going to require automaticity, which basically just means that kids can quickly and accurately recognize letters, words, and language conventions. And it requires practice, right? Just like anything else, we're going to have to make sure that we're practicing with our kiddos. So when it comes to fluency, I want to remember that fluency must happen before a student can comprehend what they're reading. And just like we said right now with word analysis, right? Word analysis and decoding has to happen before I can have fluency. They're all precursors to each other. So if my kids are having difficulty sounding out words, are they going to be able to read the way they speak? No, right? Because they're still having difficulty figuring out what those words are. So once they can decode, then we can start working on their fluency. Okay, when we talk about reading with appropriate word stress, that's, you know, like when I read a sentence, I don't know, like if I'm saying, are you crazy, right? I could put the word stress on different words, right? So I could say, are you crazy? I could say, are you crazy? Or are you crazy? right? That's putting stress on the correct words. So that's something that kids have to learn how to do when they're reading. There's pitch. So for example, if I'm asking a question, I have that inflection, right, at the, or intonation, I have that at a different point. So like I said right now, right, are you crazy, right? My voice kind of changes that pitch, as well as that intonation, right? Depending on what I'm reading or how I'm reading. We want to make sure that we're reading the way we speak. All right, moving on. So again, as I mentioned, right, this is a prerequisite to comprehension. And so before a kid can comprehend, they have to have good fluency. And remember, we talked about this on Monday. Fluent doesn't mean that we're not talking about if you're like a fluent English speaker, right? Or like a fluent Spanish speaker. We're talking about fluency in terms of reading. You're a fluent reader, so you can read the way you speak. And so if students are focusing on decoding language instead of understanding the text, then they're not working on comprehension, right? So right now we're not talking about kids understanding what they're reading. We're just talking about kids being able to read what they're, what's in front of them, the way we speak. So they're two different things. So an example, right? If a teacher is asking a student to read aloud to the class, what the teacher is actually checking for or working on in class is reading fluency. But if the teacher is going to ask the student a question about what they just read, then that's a comprehension question. And students are probably not going to be able to answer it, right? Because they were focusing all their energies on making sure that they said everything correctly, but they weren't focusing any of their energies on understanding what they were reading. So if you're going to ask kids a comprehension question, right, you're going to have to give them more time, let them read it again a couple of times before they can actually, tell you what it means. Okay, so when it comes to reading fluency, these are the things that students have to be able to know how to do. So they have to make sure they're reading at the correct rate, which is at a good speed. They're not reading too slow. They're not reading too fast. They're reading at a rate that we can understand and they can understand. They have to be accurate, which means that they're just reading words correctly. They have to have correct prosody. So that's using correct patterns of rhythm and sound. In other words, they're not reading like a robot. And they've also got to have that correct intonation, right? Which is using that correct pitch. So if I don't know what any of these words are, make sure you jot them down so that you do, understand what those are. Because I have seen them on like practice questions where they'll mention if a student, isn't using correct prosody or correct intonation. So something that I know, in my years of teaching, I had kids that, would come to, I had them in high school and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm a good reader, miss. I can read really fast, right? And so they would read and they would just like, right? They would just like spit it all out, but they weren't reading with these things here, right? Rate, accuracy, prosody, or intonation. And so they really weren't fluent readers. And since they weren't fluent readers, they were definitely not good at comprehension. Okay, so they weren't understanding what they were reading at all. They were just regurgitating the words, and so it wasn't making sense even when they were reading it to me. And so I know that there was a time where they were having kids like, okay, come on, let's see, we want to have the fastest readers. Who's the fastest readers? And so again, these are kind of why the state of Texas is kind of taking that turn towards going to the science of teaching reading, because that wasn't a good strategy, right? It's not about who's the fastest reader, right? It's about who's reading fluently enough to be able to comprehend what you're actually reading. Okay, so when it comes to comprehension, right, students have to have good word decoding skills to read with fluency. And so again, fluency is going to lead to better comprehension. And so if you as a teacher can recognize or identify where a kid is having a problem, then you can work on that specific area. So in other words, right, if I notice that a student, they're not comprehending something, right, the first thing I want to check is, okay, well, is the student reading with fluency, right? So I may have the student read aloud to me, or, you know, read something to me. And if I can see that the student is having difficulty with fluency, right, they're not reading like at the correct rate and all that, then maybe I'm going to be like, okay, you know what? Let me see if they're actually able to decode, right? Maybe they're reading so slow, right, that they can't work on fluency. So if they're reading super, super slow because they're really having to sound out those words, then that means I'm actually gonna have to go back to decoding, right? That's what I'm gonna have to focus on. If I can get my students to work on the decoding, then will come fluency, and then will come comprehension. So I kind of have to look at where my students having difficulty, and then that's going to help me to figure out what it is that I have to target. But if a kid isn't comprehending, I'm not just going to go and be like, okay, read it again, you know, read it again, like read it faster, because if they're still having difficulty with word analysis or fluency, that's not going to help them, right? How is that going to help them? So next up, we're going to go ahead and try, oops, oh, it's on the, I think it's on the next slide after that. We'll have a little activity to try it out in a bit. But when it comes to fluency strategies, these are some ways that I can have my students work on their fluency. And these are also strategies that I can help my English learners as well. So one thing I want to do is have repeated readings. And so I'm sure that all of you in Head Start, you probably do this. You probably read the same story, like maybe every day for a week or every day for a couple of days. That was something that I did notice with my son in his kindergarten class. They would read the same story Monday through Friday, right? And every day they're reading it again and again so that the kids can hear, you know, how the teacher is saying it. Once my son starts reading, right, if he's like in first, second, third grade, the teacher is probably going to have the kids read it more than once, right? And so if they read it again, what it's going to do, it's just going to help them with learning how to, you know, say things in the correct pitch, right? Say them at the right speed, you know, emphasize words at the right time. Another thing you could do would be choral reading. And so with choral reading, what you do is you could have, you know, the whole class read something together. Maybe me as a teacher, I'm going to read a sentence, and then my whole class is going to read a sentence, or I'm going to have this half of the room read, you know, this paragraph, and then this half of the room will read that paragraph. And by doing that, the students are hearing what their how their classmates are reading, and they're practicing it with them. So they're hearing it and they're doing it. And then I could also pair my students up. So that's going to be a good way to help with my English learners. When it comes to my English learners, I want to make sure that I always partner them up with someone that's going to help them. So when it comes to questions, practice questions, if you ever have a question and they say you have an English learner, it's always the wrong answer if it says you're going to keep all your English learners together. We never want to do that. We want to make sure that we're always spreading them out so that they can hear and they can talk to other kids that are fluent, you know, fluent readers, fluent speakers. So pairing students up is going to help each other. And then interactive digital programs. So there are programs that can read to the students. So the students can be reading aloud with the program, or the program can be reading and the student can be following along, and that's going to help them with fluency. And then the last thing would be silent sustained reading. So the rule for silent sustained reading is 20 minutes a day. Obviously, kindergartners are not going to do that, right? They're not even reading yet. So eventually they're going to work up to that. But 20 minutes a day is what we want to have kids doing. And in a lot of elementary schools, they have like a time in the day where they have the time just blocked out. And at that time, all the kids are reading for those 20 minutes. It's only 20 minutes, no more, no less. Like that's the time that we want to stick to. Oops, what happened in my nearpod? Oh, there we go. Okay, so here is our activity. And let's see how you all do. Okay, so in your Nearpod, there is going to be another video, and this video here is showing, again, that reading intervention teacher from Reading Rockets. It's just showing her working with a student on fluency. Okay, so it's going to kind of give you the strategies that she uses to help this student with that. And then our very last thing for today are our last practice questions. So that concludes our review for today. I want to thank you for joining me and for making it to the end of my video. Please make sure you like and subscribe down at the bottom. If there's anything specific that you'd like for me to cover, please drop it in the comments. And hopefully that's something that I can get started working on. Thank you.